Welcome to Morning Call, a podcast where we share our experiences around letting go of grief and learn to move with grace through mourning. We are your hosts, Alyce Christina
and Crystal Lee, two friends who connected through yoga and movement and ultimately found a deeper connection over our own parental losses.
We share how our experiences have informed us to live our lives more authentically, boldly, and in the now so that you can do the same. We believe where there is pain, there is transformation.
From the loss of a loved one to change in a career, a heartbreak, identity shift, and many other forms of loss, we walk this path together.
To discover the light within the darkness, we recognize the joy within pain and invite you to dive in with us as we share in the hope, laughter, and lightness of the mourning journey.
Join us for stories, interviews, and conversations that connect us as we explore the universal experience of loss that invokes the becoming of one's true self.
Welcome back to the Morning Call podcast. My name is Alyce, and I'm here with
Crystal.
And we are so excited to introduce to you a very special guest, Bethany Anderson. She is based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. She is owner of Pranayama House, a healing movement studio here in Charlotte. She is a visionary and luminary of movement, of meditation cushions, of sound bowl, goddess giving healing sound, and is a mother and a dear friend. And we were so excited to have you with us this morning, Bethany. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and to share and to talk and chat.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into some topics around really how you use the modalities of your creative practices, right? From yoga, movement, sound bowls, meditation, to facilitate a form of healing and navigation for specifically grief.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really interesting because it all kind of makes sense to me now in hindsight. And at the time of beginning to process grief years ago, before starting these modalities, I was not even fully aware that I was grieving. I knew that I was crying in closets. I knew that I was sad. I knew that I felt up and down and just a little bit chaotic in my own being. And I didn't necessarily, it wasn't until I was processing it in different ways that I realized what it was that I was processing. So I am very grateful for the practices of yoga and meditation and movement. And that's all where it pretty much started for me in 2017, around between 2017 and 2018 at Yoga One in Plaza Midwood, which became such a safe haven for me when, again, I did not know what I was working through. I just thought my job was hard, or I was a parent and doing things all the time. And I had just lost someone really, really close to me. And I remember coming home and my partner was not very supportive of me taking the time to move through that grief. And so it was yeah, I know you lost your friend, but you need to get back to work. And I was I can't, I don't know how to do that. And so a few days later, I eventually would go to work, but come home. And I said, I would be in the closet, or just the pushing forward or pushing through felt like grief on top of the grief that I was experiencing, even though I didn't have a name for it. And so I started going to Yoga One to practice. I had been practicing at home, and I had been working out. I have always used movement, even before yoga, as a means of peace. So when I was young, I played sports. Like I played basketball, I played volleyball, I ran track, I played softball. I basically was like doing sports year round just to keep myself in motion. But when I was like younger and things felt hard, I would always find my way to like a basketball court and I would just shoot and shoot and shoot for hours. Like that was just my way of healing. And even though I didn't know it at the time, it just was like, it felt like a safe space. Like I didn't have to think, I could just put up shots and move my body and sweat. And I'm not a cardio girl, so like that was that's the only way you can really get me to run. So that was just my release. And then at one point I was in a gym and I noticed that they were having like a Thai class, a Tai Chi class, and I was like, oh, like what's going on in there? And I just heard this breath that just sounded like life, and I was like, I need to know what that is. And if you know me, I'm a very nosy person. Like I have to ask a million questions. I need to know what's going on. Like I got to peep through the corner. I just need to know, especially if it feels intriguing to me. So I started to study breath work, and that's how I ended up doing yoga at home before I found Yoga One. Finding Yoga One was a true blessing for me because that was my first experience of community outside of like the sports teams that I had played for. And the practice would bring me to tears again and again and again. It was just like this energetic release that I didn't know that I needed. And then I also wasn't getting in my closet when I was crying. Like I was getting a release in there, but like I needed this community and to be seen and to be felt and to be heard. And yeah, Yoga One was my first experience of that. And that's where I met Alyce. And yeah.
When did you start to implement? Well, I would argue that breath work is also sound healing, but sound bowls and sound healing into your practices.
During the pandemic. So as soon as I finished my first yoga teacher training at Yoga One, I was seeking sound healing for myself. And I honestly couldn't really like tell you why or what it was that was really speaking to me or speaking to my spirit, but I knew that I wanted some form of sound, and so I had started studying it. But at the time, through all of that like version of grief, there's a song that Solange has that I actually was just listening to this morning called Cranes in the Sky. And she's like, I tried to drink it away, I tried to smoke it away, I tried to like do all of these things. And I felt like I went through those cycles as I was moving through grief. Like I quit my corporate job, I was going through a breakup at the same time, and like I was just trying to rid myself of anything, and yet still I was like sitting with this grief. And so at the time I was like, these sound baths are really, really expensive. And like, I really just need to get them the bowls myself, get the instruments myself so that I can have access to it at home whenever I need it. Because I also needed it for my son. So I'm a single parent, and I noticed that my son was like dealing with things in life that I could support him in processing, but that he also needed, like, there was another layer that I couldn't go in myself and get to. And talk therapy was not really working for him. And mainly because he's like this, he wants to be a hero. So like at the time he was just like saving kids on the playground, and he was mediating everyone and like their affairs and whatever was going on. But like he was not really, dealing with things himself. So the grief that I had experienced, you know, he might not have talked about it often, but he was also going through that grief with me. I had been, especially during the pandemic, he and I were very, very close. And so I had gone through this breakup. I had also lost someone that was very close to both of us. And while I was processing that grief, he was going through the loss of having his dad in a home, the loss of this person that was close to both of us. And so he needed another way, and he didn't want to talk to anyone about it. And so the sound bowls really helped. So there were nights where he would be like, can you just come in my room and give me a sound bath? And I would, and he would just like go to sleep, and it was really beautiful. So yeah, it started as me needing it for myself and needing it in my home, and really feeling like I needed access to it on a regular basis. Most of what I was finding when I was looking was really expensive, which, as it should be, like, people should get paid for their gifts and their creations and their services. But at the time, like, that wasn't in my budget. That was not something that I could afford. So I was like, how can I make this happen for myself and for my family? And so I purchased the instruments, and I would play them for Gabe and I, but then I would also like share these videos on Instagram. And so then people are like, can you come to this Juneteenth festival and like do a sound bath? And can you come here and come there? And one thing that I learned at Yoga One was to be a yes. So I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, I'd love to. I'd love to. And so my first public sharing of a sound bath was to like over 100 people at this Juneteenth celebration. And it was just one of the most pure and like healing experiences, because I was also during like the pandemic. It was during 2020. And not only were we all going through just like processing something that we did not fully understand, there was a, a whole movement of like Black Lives Matter. And it was a resurgence of grief for people of color that could not necessarily be explained. And so, one thing that I love about sound is that there's no need for that explanation. There really is no need for words. I could hold a sound bath and not say a word, and it could touch each and every person there, and animal, if there are animals present too, in a way that is necessary without me saying a word. And so it surpasses all words, and sometimes grief gets into these places that words can't really get into.
It's like the vibration of the sound. One of my teachers, Suzanne Lightyear, calls music like the voice of angels. I believe I've heard her say that, and that and really is. It's like music is the first thing children gravitate towards, right? Like that's why all the kids songs are like sing-songy, and or you make a beat to get them to go to the potty or like whatever, or to eat their food. And because they have a clearer connection, like as a new human, you have a clearer connection, at least I believe, to a higher source, right? And I think that like with sound bowls too, it's like that. It opens the gates to have that connection to our higher source, our higher power, our higher self, that induces a collective healing.
One thing I was going to say too is like we were all experiencing with the pandemic a collective trauma. And then, at the same time, I mean, Black people have been experiencing collective trauma for centuries on end, obviously, not just during 2020, but, and sometimes well, most of the time, I think with trauma and different types of grief, sometimes there just are not words to explain what you're experiencing. So I think sound sometimes might be the only way to like begin to heal.
Yeah. Because sometimes it can even make it frustrating, or even to like not seem real if you don't have the words to put to it. And so to not minimize the experience, like we're in this experience, and not necessarily how do we deal with it, because it's not even a means of like dealing with it or coping with it. To me, it's more so a recalibration of like our energetic bodies and a reset. And what blows my mind is that I do sound baths probably every single day now, because I do in all of my classes, in with a shavasana in a sound bath. And I'm still like, okay, like I get like this somatic experience daily, and there's so much trauma that is like a compound experience, just this compound trauma. And so I feel so deeply for all of us because we don't all get to just walk around with these sound bowls every day. I wish that we could, which is why I try to make them as accessible as possible. And because it is necessary without needing to say what it is or without needing to put words to what it is. And as Alyce was saying, you know, children come into this world and they're very much connected to like this higher power. And I think that's what the recalibration is, because we are them. Like we are them in a different embodiment. We are these children in like a bigger or fuller body, but like we are them. We came into this world the exact same way, so we get to recalibrate to the truth. And we pick up so many truths along the way, and that oftentimes feels or looks like trauma. And to be able to recalibrate to the truth of being, to the truth of our existence, can it can sometimes be almost hindered by words, because like the logical mind, which I'm a very logically minded person, which is why I think that like the vibrations are very helpful for me, because just as much as I can like think my way through something, I can think my way into something and like start to create these walls of like, okay, well, you know that you're at this phase of grief, so this is what you need to do. And while all of this knowledge is really great, the experience of it does not always work that way. And it doesn't always feel that easeful as like an equation of A plus B equals C.
Was almost like a clearing of the energetic body, you know, like it starts with that, like the movement practice of yoga or somatic movement or intuitive movement, whatever it may be, however you want to label it. um, Provides an access to be able to receive, like, and it can be as simple as like the choice of like walking into the sound bath, right, and making the choice to sit and be still as a form of movement, to receive, to clear out that energetic, right, like you're like words have so many meanings, and depending on who we are, who you are, and we could say one word and all three of us could have a different meaning of what it means to us, right? And so when you remove the that logical thinking, that like when what we say it in yoga, like get out of your head and into your body, right, where like the sound um almost gives access to the energetic body and the spiritual body to, you know, maybe facilitate healing, right? Or yeah, like, I don't even want to put words on it, right? 'Cause I don't want to stifle someone's experience of like, oh, this should be a healing experience. And it might not be. It could just be, right? Like, what did you say? A recalibration of whatever that truth. Like, I'm am very aware when I'm speaking about, like, I don't like saying coping. I don't like saying dealing with when it comes to grief, because in my experience, and I think a new, like, greater language around it is navigating, and I love that. I think that recalibrating also goes with navigating, because if we're just coping, it means we're just getting by, and no one, in at least I believe, deserves to just get by in this life. I want to be here to live and be alive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
And sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and how beautiful to be able to share that with your child, And we've talked to Amelia about, how um, she navigated her own loss, as a 7-year-old, right? And a lot of that came with drawing, like art therapy. And it did eventually turn into more of a talk therapy for her. And she shared about, um, the how signs really, and still impact her. Uh, and to give that tool of, yeah, of something that doesn't involve words, I think is more accessible too for children to understand.
One thing that I noticed is that when I was seeking ways to support Gabe in this grief, there's like all these charts with like emotions, and like there's so many listed. Like, and how do you take what you're feeling and really decide, okay, it fits into the box of like this word? And yes, the list of like is like such a long list. But what if it does not fit into any of those words? And then that could just spiral into so many other things. Well, what's wrong with me? Like, what am I actually feeling? What is this? And the what is this? How do I fix this? All of that, or even fixing it in general, is I I love the information age that we get to live in, that we get to have access to, and this idea of constantly fixing or healing ourselves with this information that we have, to me feels like it's taking away from my own human experience. And I am a human, and in my experience as a human, I'm gonna grieve, I'm gonna lose things, I'm gonna experience different like elations and like everything in between. And what I realized, because for a while I was like going through these bouts of what felt like depression and feeling like I could not get out of this dark state, like that medication wasn't going to help me, or that therapy wasn't going to help me, and that I just did not know how I was going to get out of this state. And then realizing that as dark as that felt, I could feel as light, and I didn't want to erase any of the emotions in between. And so instead of creating this vacuum where I only felt like this little bit of emotions just to keep myself safe, I knew that I had the capacity to feel all that was here for me in this human experience, and that I was not on this constant journey of healing. That is where the recalibration comes into play for me, because there's no like, oh, well, when you're healed, or oh, well, when it's better. Like, there's a constant ebb and flow, and the journey is not for me to get there. The journey is for me to be here. And the instruments or the frequencies, they help me to be here in a state where I can trust what I'm feeling and trust what's coming up for me, because it's not always an experience that feels like, oh, okay, that was a great energetic release. Sometimes what needs to be released is like fierce energy, or it's like ancestral energy, and some of it is not like excited to be in you, and it's definitely not going to be excited to make its way out. And so like it's just not. And so it can be a shaky feeling, or one that feels a little bit chaotic. And that's where the recalibration comes into play, because like the recalibration is just a journey back to the truth. However, whatever path you took to get anywhere else, in order to take that path back, whatever happened along the way is going to come up for you, whatever that was. And so it's a reminder for me that I can be here, and I do have the tools to be here for what life has in store for me, whether that like looks good, bad, indifferent, like none of those words matter. I get to be here, and I'm grateful for that.
What you're saying, well, reminds me of two things. We spoke with someone from an organization called Evermore that we're going to have on hopefully soon as a guest as well. And she said, and I've heard this in other grief spaces, that there's nothing necessarily wrong with the term healing, but they don't like to use it because it implies there's an end state of like healed. And that's what you're saying. Like, we have to get to a destination. And in our like Western culture, there's a lot of focus on that instead of just like the constant evolving, the constant recalibration. Like, what if there's not a destination? Like, the journey along the way, like, is the thing. And I love that, she said that, and that's kind of, it's what we're talking about now. And the second piece is just this whole discussion about like somatic healing and everything you're talking about. Sometimes the energy comes from intergenerational stuff. The book, The Body Keeps the Score, um, because it's what we're talking about. And that sometimes the grief or joy or whatever emotion it is, if we're like labeling it, it sits in the body. Like, there isn't language for it. And I think that's what you're saying.
And I think taking away the need for like language also takes us out of the need to like point the blame or to pinpoint the source, because I think that regardless of what the source is, we can be with it and we can like recalibrate. But like to sit with what is does not require us to like have this deep understanding with words of what it is. It does require like a boldness to be with it and to trust that we get to be these vessels that let it move through us, or that we just get to experience it as it is. Eckhart Tolle calls it like the pain body. And the pain body almost is like this energetic ancestral like DNA. And so how, in whatever form we came to this earth in, like we can carry these different pain bodies from past like ancestors, and just like in the makeup of our DNA. And so when we get into the semantics of it and like, well, this is from like this part of my life, or this is from this part of my life, we can really miss out on surrendering ourselves and like letting go of our own egos and our minds, and just being in this experience of surrender so that we can truly recalibrate. Because some of this we may never understand with words. Some of the words that we have been given to us with different agendas for different reasons. And so we have to move past beyond all formal understanding to get to a point of like surrendering to the frequencies. Because the truth about sound and any frequency is that it is a portal of information. And we don't need to know or understand that information. There are no words for it. But the cells in our bodies get to recalibrate according to the information being carried by these frequencies. And our cells are each holding on to some information as well. And it's vital that we remember, for me, how miraculous it is that we are here in these bodies, which each and every cell that make us who we are, and that we allow ourselves to be that. When I get into, and I did, like I went through years where I was like, I need to train and train and train. And I was learning so much, y'all. I was just like tossing all types of information in my brain. Just like I was learning so much. And while that is so beautiful and I feel privileged to have been able to do that, what I'm well aware of now in my own body is that what I really need to do as a human is be a human and like be in this human experience.
You said something earlier about the grief on top of the grief, like cultural expectations. And we've talked about this a little bit before in the podcast, but cultural expectations around like getting back to work, moving forward. Um, that just what you just said brings me back to that. So I'd love to hear more of your thoughts around that, or like how to, I don't know, say, I'm not doing that or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish that I knew like this magic potion culturally to where we could just like be like, hey, actually, I'm not going to subscribe to that right now so that I can rest. Because rest is vital. It's important to honor that everything ebbs and flows. Like, so when we're talking about frequencies, I know we keep coming back to that, but that literally is everything. Everything, the breath, the cycles, everything ebbs and flows. And so to give ourselves rest is an important part of our journeys always, no matter what part of life that we're going through. And it's very hard, it has been very hard for me as like a single mom and a black woman to be like, okay, I'm not gonna do these things right now because I need to rest. I might feel like I need to rest more than anybody around me. I don't always necessarily feel like I have access to do so. So one thing that I have been practicing most recently is pausing where I can. So maybe I don't get to take like this extended, like when I feel like I need years off right now, truly, to be able to like process things. And I might not get that right now. What I do get to do is like pause and take very, very deep breaths, even if it's just like a commute to my son's school or within the day before I start my next thing or teach my next class. What I can also do is honor like my true yeses and my true nos. There are times when it comes to friends or family when being around them feels really, really nourishing, and I need to say yes to that and no to the other things. But then there are also times where I need to say no to all things. And in the past year or so, I've been in the practice of that, and I've gotten it. It has been well received by some, and not so well received by others, and that's okay. And I think the reminder to myself that that's also okay is a beautiful thing. I think sometimes the books and like the level of awareness can sometimes make me feel like I can control things by how I show up so that everything will run smoothly. And that's not the goal. Like it's not. And so there will be times where what I actually need is for my inner world to feel calm, and I need to honor that first. So like the honoring the true yeses and the true nos, and sleeping. Like before, I didn't sleep, y'all. In my 20s, I did not sleep. I would just like be like, oh, okay, I need to do this or I need to do that. I was working full time. I was a full time student. I was a full time single mom. And so I really was not sleeping. And it didn't even dawn to me that I needed to sleep. What dawned to me was that I need to do X, Y, and Z and get these things done. And so now, um, one of my friends always says, like, at the end of the day is done. And I let the day be done. And I let tomorrow be tomorrow. And what didn't get done today, maybe, hopefully, it'll get done tomorrow. What I'm not going to do is run myself into the ground today.
And what you're doing, back to what you said, is honoring your humanness, and that is so countercultural, which is mind-boggling because we're all humans, but it's so countercultural to people that, some people might not receive that well. Like, you're like, I need to rest, I need to do what's better for my internal calm state or whatever, and some people don't understand that because we are not taught that in our culture. um I don't know if you've heard of Trisha Hersey. She if she's leads the nap ministry, and it's like she talks about rest as a resistance practice, and she's fantastic. So
I love that. The humanness of, I think we overall, no matter what we're feeling, it's like either if it's like a feeling of elation, joy, success, like these high vibration things, we're conditioned to get there and then be like, what's next? So often I find that culturally we, as humans, don't know how to even be in those spaces of celebration. right? And then so when we're in these lower vibrations of whether it's rest, calm, peace, maybe it is grief, maybe it is sadness, maybe it is anger or frustration, um, we're there and we also don't know how to be in it. Like it's like one side of the thing, if it's calm and peace, it's like we doubt why we should be there, right? We doubt, and same thing with like the upper ones, like why do I deserve this? And then when it's with the like the opposite end of that spectrum and the grief and the frustration and anger and sadness, it's like we want it to be so temporary, and we're not giving ourselves the space to rest in any of them, right? And so I love that, like being able to recalibrate to our own experience of humanness. And it's like almost when you give yourself that opportunity, and I think that's what sound bowls do and movement does, like intentional movement, in any capacity, it provides access to remembering that we are already perfect. We are already whole and we're not broken. There's nothing to fix in our experience. And yeah, I just wrote, and it's like if our end goal, I said this the other day, talking to someone, I said, the end goal is like where you're dead. What is there to experience when we're dead? Why do we want that to be the goal? Why do we want to get to the end? I'm like, oh my gosh, not we need to, I want to rewire how I think. I want to be in my life alive in this moment, um, and trusting what I'm experiencing.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that even in this idea of like rewiring, it's a very masculine way that we've been taught to look at so many things. And what I feel that I'm personally missing, in that if there was a goal of healing that would like heal this planet, it's like a resurgence of feminine energy. We are not taught to soften at any extreme. So, like you were saying, we get to these points and it's like, okay, what's next? Or we get into these states of darkness and it's like, we don't even let ourselves like be in it then. And it's because there's no sense of like softness anywhere. We're not encouraged to soften anywhere along the journey. And so this idea of softening to, or being with, or flowing with, like those are all feminine energies. And we operate in this patriarchy that leaves our experience in society void of that. So if our experience in society is like void of this feminine essence, then not only do we have to bring it into like our own homes, we also have to bring it into our bodies as our homes. And so it is not necessarily a radical concept for us to soften and to be. However, in a society that is ran in this patriarchal way, it feels like a radical concept to just go against the grain, which is like, again, a masculine energy to go against the grain. But what's happening is at some point we have to just declare, I get to declare that, like, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that because it doesn't serve me. Is at the end, it is like, okay, well, then we die. So, who did I let determine what success is for me and my lifetime before that happened? And is success even the word that I'm seeking in this lifetime? Like, I want to live. And
Or what is success? Like, is living fully the success,
the
right? Like, not success
success.
defined by anyone else.
Yes. And so there's like a natural balance and a natural order of this masculinity that creates a structure, and then this feminine energy that creates a flow. But when we're just stacking structure on top of structure on top of structure on top of structure, we don't really give ourselves. I found myself not giving myself the opportunity to flow, and I found myself in a deep state of depression because of that. And it sent me into a space that did feel like a death. It did. And it was, in a sense, because there was like this huge death of a part of me that could not move forward. And I could not continue to pretend or put on this mask that was very like structured but not fitting to my being. And not even allowing me the space to like truly breathe expansively or be within that mask. And so to let that shatter, but then also figure out, okay, what structure does work for me? Like, how can I find out what works for me in like this container? And then what does it look like to flow within that container? And sometimes that question itself is too much of a confinement versus just being in the experience of it. Life is just it is wild because life has just looked and felt so drastically different than everything I've ever thought. And every time I thought that I knew, I thought wrong. And like it's never been what I thought it was going to be. So at some point I needed to get out of the thoughts and to let myself experience what was right in front of me and what was happening. And, you know, especially within owning and operating this business, it has felt like really almost another experience of just like my own spiritual self. Because running a business, I can only speak for America because that's the only country I've ever lived in and ran a business in. And so like running a business in this country is very masculine, and not to say that it is separate only for men. It is just masculine in energy where it's like you're doing, you're doing, you're doing. And the nature of the business that I run cannot I would not feel an integrity if I ran it as business as usual. How, what that will end up looking like, I am not sure. And I can only trust and have faith that the truth of like who I am and what I desire to experience and bring about or cultivate within this space will sustain for as long as it needs to. But I cannot sit here and say that rest is sacred, which is the name of Octavia Rahim's next book. Octavia Rahim is amazing. She is very much like rest forward, and I appreciate her for those messages continually like playing through the algorithm because we do need to see that. I do need to see that. And but I cannot sit here and constantly say or share that there is no rush and that there is nothing to fix and that rest is imperative, but not rest myself. I could not do that in integrity, and I will not run anything. This business is like another child of mine, and raising my son Gabe, who is like that's a whole nother topic of grief. I'm going through a stage of grief with him because he used to be this little bitty baby in my hands, and like yesterday he's like, my shoulders are higher than yours, and I'm like, how is that possible? To even be able to hold space for like him growing as he's growing, but also being his own individual. There's a part of me that has truly began to understand integrity through raising him. And so this business being another child of mine, is calling me even deeper into that sense of integrity all over again, and almost like raising this business where it's like, no, like I don't care if that is the social norm. I'm not going to move in that way. I don't care if that's a social norm. I'm not going to introduce that to my child. And yeah, so there's just like this stance that people may never see, or they may never understand, or they may never catch wind of it. And that is not the point. But the point is that, like, in my own body, I know that I will move through trauma, and I know that I will experience grief. And there are just certain conditions of suffering that I will not bring on to myself from a lack of integrity. Like, I want to experience this life through a lens of truth.
I just wrote the other day that grief holds joy and joy holds grief. And I think that, you know, I think we all, and I think that's one of our points and missions of Morning Call, is to really to accept and identify the various stages of and forms that grief shows up in and mourning, and how we can lay to rest even different versions of ourselves or different iterations of the businesses we create, and that there's that grief can become mourning. Like, let's celebrate the journey, let's celebrate the challenges that helped us evolve into this new iteration of ourselves, just like the people that came before us, right? Just like, yeah, and all these versions of ourselves and our experiences are worth honoring, they're worth celebrating, they're worth being in, because I guarantee you there's a lesson in it if we're not trying to fix it, if we're truly just being alive in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes what I feel in grief is that when I recognize that I have been trying to fix things, or I have been trying to just like show up in a way that doesn't even feel authentic, part of what I'm grieving is like the truth of me that like wasn't present at that time. And then I do get to celebrate the opportunity to be fully present right now and show up in my truth right now. And for that truth to just be what it is regardless, like that is a very liberating feeling. It feels extremely liberating. So if I don't get to feel that liberation in my own mind, in my own heart, and in my own body, then where do I get to experience it? And and so I do believe that the ebb and the flow that we go through, and these movement practices that we get to honor, our spaces where we get to like simply be in all iterations of the practices and let ourselves like live. And so for me, I do want to live. And I want to live with every version of myself, because those steps are the journey. There is not one step that doesn't go counted into the journey. And I even started to notice this. This might sound really wild, but I started to notice that when I was walking upstairs, like I would even skip steps then. Like I would just be so eager to get to the top of the stairs that I would like walk up every 2 steps. Like I wouldn't even step on every step then. I would go up every 2 steps. I'm like, what is it? What is the rush and the journey? What is it that you're trying to get to that you can't even be here? And so I'm really grateful to love myself in this space where it's like, okay, this could get ugly, this can be like really beautiful, and what you get to do is like feel yourself in it and feel your way through it, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and we're taught, when you are both are talking about the different iterations of ourselves as we go through life, that's a natural progression of just, as we talked about, our humanness, but we're not taught, like I think there's grief and joy in that. Like we sort of grieve and shed our old selves while also looking forward to and being hopeful towards and joyful towards like the new self. And those can be held at the same time, but we're not taught in our culture to do that. Like we're just taught to move forward, like you're saying, skipping the steps. And I think it's such a beautiful conscious practice that you're creating, both of you are, and what I think we're all trying to do is like honoring the both and of the different versions of ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
It's I was just going to say it restores choice, right? Which is when we restore our own choice back to our truth, right? That is power, right? It's not like we hold the power to to be the change that we want to see in the world, right? Like to do that, like whether it's on this platform, whether it's through Pranayama House, whether it's in the grocery store, how we drive our cars, like that is, and that is a to restore choice is a rebirth, right? Those parallels of like one thing has to die to birth something new. We were wondering how has specifically like in this conversation of the kind of like rebirth, restoring choice, laying to rest these versions of ourselves, right? Which we do mourn past versions of ourselves, past iterations. How has your sound bowls, how do you utilize your practices from sound bowls to movement um when you're kind of rebirthing yourself?
I think the movement for me helps me to come back to my own reality. And I feel like I operate in a world and there's many different iterations of myself within that. And to be able to come back to my body, I get to come back to like what is real and present for me right now. And it also brings me back to like this recalibration of appreciation for. I'm grateful for this iteration of myself. I'm grateful for this iteration of my body. And I would not be this version of myself or body, spiritually, physical body, energetic body, had I not experienced all that I've experienced in this lifetime. And I can only speak to that in this lifetime. Like, that's just for this current iteration. And so I think that movement brings me back to that. Sound brings me back to that because there, again, is a softening that I get to remember is possible. And remembering for me is not just a sense of like recalling something, but really a piecing together, like bringing back these parts of myself. And most of the time, when I'm even thinking about bringing back these parts of myself, I'm going back to the very, very basics. It's back to my body. It's back to my breath. It's back to the inhale. It's back to the exhale. How does my neck feel in this moment? How do my shoulders feel in this moment? What have I been carrying? Even without needing to naming it, where have I been carrying it? And does it feel good to carry that right now? And so this renewal or a sense of renewal or recalibration comes from deciding in this moment, is that something that I'm saying yes to, like holding on to and letting be a part of me as I move forward? Or can I just let my shoulders down and say, like, no, that actually is not me. I can put that down. If I picked it up, I can put it back down. But what movement and sound do is it brings me back to just like naked truth of myself. Am I holding on to something that isn't mine to hold on to? And am I ready to put it down yet?
I love that, the naked truth.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And making the choice to, hey, is that mine? No, it's not. I
No, it's
want to
not.
let it
Like,
go.
and And most of the time it's like if I have to question what it is or where it came from, that's not mine. Like, and I don't need to hold on to it. And if I notice that it's bringing my body or my mind out of a state of balance, that's not mine. Then in those moments of stillness and those moments of softness, I get to come back to like an experience of myself and this direct connection to source, this very direct connection to source coming through to me is not just like these thoughts, because even my thoughts can be impacted and influenced by other things. I don't want to experience that influence in my body. I want to know what is real and what is true and what directly to me from like this higher power that decides that I get to be here and that that's why there's breath in my body. So what purpose is this thing that I'm carrying in my shoulder serving right now? If it's not serving me and my physical body, it's not serving anyone around me. So let me go ahead and let that go.
I love that. Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
Any last thoughts for us?
Oh, I'm really grateful to have been a part of this conversation. Yeah, I love the ability to just flow and share. And this has been another iteration of what that softness and just that feminine energy can be. So I'm really
Yeah,
grateful. Thank you.
absolutely. If you're in Charlotte, check out Pranayama House. Um, yeah, come talk to us about all things life, death, identity, femininity, breaking the mold. Come breathe with us, move with us, sound bowl with us. All the things, all the things. Thank you, Bethany, so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.